My name is Savannah. I'm 31 years old, a registered nurse in the cardiac ICU at Memorial Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. I work 12-hour shifts, 3 days a week, and on my days off, I usually pick up overtime because that's just the kind of person I am. I carry the weight of strangers' lives in my hands, and I've never once thought about putting it down. I tell you that so you understand what kind of woman I am before I tell you what happened to me. It was the Wednesday before Easter. I had just finished a 48-hour stretch, double shifts back to back because 2 of our nurses had called out sick, and I physically cannot, walk away when people need me. I was running on 3 hours of sleep and a gas station coffee that had long gone cold in my cuff holder. My scrubs still smelled faintly of antiseptic. My feet ached in that deep bone-level way that doesn't go away until you've slept for 10 hours straight. But I was happy. I was driving 4 hours north to Roanoke, Virginia, where my husband and his grandfather were supposed to be waiting for me. We had made plans months ago. Easter dinner at the house, my husband's mother flying in from Phoenix, a real family holiday. I had ordered a honey-glazed ham from the butcher near our house. I had already paid for it. I had a box of those little foil-wrapped chocolate eggs in my passenger's seat for my husband's grandfather because he had mentioned once, only once, that his late wife used to hide them around the house for him even when he was grown, and that it was the thing he missed most about her. His name was Harold, 78 years old, a Vietnam veteran who had given 30 years of his life to the United States Army, who had been diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer 6 months ago, who was living in the back bedroom of the house my husband and I owned together because his own son, my husband's father, had moved to Florida and stopped returning calls. Harold was the reason I had married into this family without reservation. He was the reason I believed that people could be fundamentally decent. I should have noticed the signs earlier. Looking back, I can trace them like breadcrumbs. The way my husband started taking long calls in the garage, the way he deflected every time I asked about Harold's latest doctor's appointment, the way he stopped mentioning Easter altogether, as if hoping I would forget we had plans. I didn't forget. I turned onto our street just after 7 in the evening. The neighbors across the way had a wreath on their door. The family at the end of the block had their porch lights on, warm and orange through the early spring dark. Our house was black. Every single window. The porch light off. The driveway empty. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine running. That feeling, you know the one. When your body understands something before your brain catches up. I grabbed my bag and the box of chocolate eggs and went inside. The smell reached me before I found the light switch. It wasn't terrible, not yet. But it was there. The particular, unmistakable smell of a house where someone has been sick and no one has been taking care of them. Stale air, something medicinal and sour underneath. The heat was off. Not turned down off. The thermostat in the hallway read 51 degrees. On the kitchen counter, held down by a coffee mug, was a note written on a yellow legal pad in my husband's handwriting. Took Mom to Sedona for the week. She needed a break. Harold's prescriptions were filled last Monday. He should be fine. Call if anything comes up. I read it twice. I stood in my 51-degree kitchen in my scrubs after 48 hours of work reading that note, and I felt something shift inside me that I don't think ever fully shifted back. He should be fine. I left the groceries on the counter and walked to Harold's room. He was in the bed under a single blanket that wasn't thick enough for 51 degrees. He was awake. His eyes found me in the doorway and something in his face, relief I think, or maybe just recognition, moved like a shadow crossing water. "Savannah," he said. His voice was very dry. "Harold." I kept my voice even. I am a cardiac ICU nurse. I have walked into rooms and kept my voice even when the situation was far worse than this. How long has the heat been off? He thought about it. Since Monday, I think. The thermostat. I couldn't get up to reach it. My legs have been bad. Monday. It was Wednesday. I turned the heat on first. Then I got him water. He drank it in long, slow swallows that told me he hadn't had enough in a while. I checked his medication bottles on the nightstand. 2 of them were empty. Not the ones filled last Monday, the ones that should have been filled 2 weeks ago, and apparently hadn't been. I didn't say anything about that to him. I just made a note of it and kept moving. I helped him to the bathroom. I changed his bedding. I found a heavier blanket in the closet. I heated up soup. There wasn't much in the kitchen, but there was soup, and I sat with him while he ate it slowly. A spoonful at a time, in the way that people eat when their appetite has mostly left them but they know they need to try. It was while I was sitting with him that he looked at me over the bowl and said, "You should leave him, you know." I didn't pretend not to understand. "Harold, I mean it." His voice was still dry, but there was something firm underneath it. Something that had not been worn down. "He's been lying to you. Not just this. There's a woman. I heard him on the phone more than once. And the account. The joint account. I saw a statement on the table 2 weeks ago. Savannah, he has been moving money out of it for months." I kept my hands folded in my lap. I'm good at keeping still. "How much?" I said. Harold looked at me with the kind of eyes that have seen worse things than this and are no longer afraid to say them out loud. $60,000, maybe more. The room was quiet. Outside, I could hear the heat finally coming back on, clicking and groaning through the vents. $60,000? That was most of our savings. That was my overtime shifts and my sacrificed weekends, and every time I'd said no to something I wanted, because we were saving up. "Harold," I said carefully, "are you in pain right now?" "Some." He set the soup bowl down. "Less than yesterday." "Okay." I reached over and straightened his blanket. "Then we don't have to talk about any of that tonight. Tonight you don't have to talk about any of that tonight. Tonight you just rest." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something. About the house." I looked at him. "Your husband doesn't know this," Harold said. "His father doesn't know either. When I updated my will last fall after the diagnosis, I made some changes. My attorney has a copy. There's a letter in the lockbox in my closet, bottom shelf, behind my dress shoes. I need you to read it." He told me where to find the key. I found the lockbox. I sat in the chair beside his bed and I read the letter by the light of the nightstand lamp, while Harold watched me with those quiet, unafraid eyes. I won't put everything in that letter here, but I will tell you what mattered. Harold had no children of his own. He had married my husband's grandmother 40 years ago when my husband's father was already a teenager, and the relationship between them had always been cordial and distant in equal measure. When Harold's wife died, he had come to live with us because there was nowhere else. He had paid rent, insisting on it, $2,000 a month, even when I told him repeatedly that it wasn't necessary, and he had never once asked for anything he didn't think he'd earned. The house we lived in, my husband and I, had been purchased with money I had largely provided. My salary, my savings, my credit score. My husband had contributed $20,000. I had contributed $130,000. Harold knew this. Harold had paid attention in a way that my husband apparently assumed he wasn't capable of anymore. In the letter, Harold explained that he had significant assets of his own, an inheritance from his own parents that had sat in a trust for 30 years, growing quietly, that nobody in the family had ever asked about because they had assumed a retired army man had nothing. He had also named me, not my husband's father, as the sole beneficiary of his estate. Not because of the money. Because of the peaches. That stopped me. I had to read it twice. Last October, he wrote, "I was having a very bad day. I didn't tell anyone. I sat in the kitchen in the morning and thought about my wife and about whether it was worth it to keep fighting this thing. Savannah came home from her night shift and she didn't ask me how I was feeling, which everyone always does, which I hate. She just sat down across from me and put a jar of peach preserves on the table and said, 'My grandmother used to say that nothing is so bad it can't be improved by something sweet.' And she made us both toast. She has no idea what that morning cost me or what she gave me back. But I do. I put the letter down on my lap and I looked at Harold for a long time. He was watching me. 'You didn't have to do this,' I said. 'I know,' he said. 'I wanted to.' I called his doctor the next morning, Dr. Dethers, Patricia Okafor, who had been managing his care and who, it turned out, had been trying to reach my husband about Harold's prescription renewals for 2 weeks. She had left 3 voicemails. He had returned none of them. I drove to the pharmacy and filled the prescriptions myself. I called a home health agency and arranged for a visiting aide to come 3 times a week. I called Harold's attorney, a woman named Louise Tran, who sounded relieved to finally be speaking to someone who was actually engaged with the situation, and told her I had read the letter and asked what the next steps were when the time came. She walked me through everything, clear and methodical, the way I like things. I did not call my husband. He called me on Friday. Cheerful. The weather in Sedona was beautiful. His mother had really needed this. Had I made it to Roanoke okay? Was Harold doing fine? I said yes to all of it. I kept my voice entirely neutral, the way I do when I'm standing at a bedside and I know more than the family does. And it isn't time yet to say it. He didn't ask to speak to Harold. He didn't ask what Harold had eaten. He didn't ask what Harold had eaten. He didn't ask if the medications were being managed. He just asked if I was okay, and I said yes, and he said great, and that was that. I spent that Easter in the back bedroom of my own house. I found Harold's old record player in the closet. He'd brought it with him from his apartment and we'd never had a place to put it. And I set it up on the dresser. He had 3 vinyl records. We listened to all of them. I boiled eggs on the Easter morning and I hid the little foil-wrapped chocolates around his room and the hallway, low enough that he could find them from the wheelchair. And I stood in the doorway and watched his face when he found the first one tucked behind the leg of the nightstand. He didn't say anything. He just held it in his palm and looked at it for a long time. We had ham that afternoon, not the one from the butcher. I'd had to cancel that. I found a small spiral cut in the freezer that someone had forgotten about, and I glazed it with the peach preserves from the jar that was still on the kitchen counter. Harold ate more than I'd seen him eat in months. He said it was the best Easter dinner he'd had since 1987. I believed him. He passed away on a Tuesday 11 days later. It was 4 a.m. I was asleep in the guest room. I had taken family medical leave from the hospital, something I had never done before in 9 years. And something woke me. The particular silence that nurses learn to recognize. The absence of sound where there used to be the small sounds of another person breathing in a room nearby. I went in. I sat beside him. I held his hand, which was already cool. He had a framed photograph on the nightstand of himself in uniform, 1971, 24 years old, standing in front of a transport helicopter somewhere in Southeast Asia that I couldn't identify. He was squinting against the sun, and he was grinning like a man who believed he was going to live forever. I am not a crier. I don't say that as something to be proud of, it's just true. I've sat with dying patients and their families, and I've held my face still and saved my falling apart for later in my car, alone. I did not cry for Harold, but I sat with him until the sun came up, and I held his hand until the sun came up, and I held his hand until it was time to make the calls, and that is the best I know how to do. My husband came back 6 days after Harold passed. He walked in with a tan and a gift shop bag, and a look of vague sheepishness that I recognized from every time he'd forgotten an anniversary or missed a thing he'd promised to attend. He was already constructing his apology. I could see it, the shape of it forming behind his eyes. He saw the wheelchair folded against the hallway wall. He saw the hospital bed that had been moved into the bedroom. He saw that the house smelled different, clean, recently cleaned, but also emptied out in the way that houses get when something large has been removed from them. When? He said. 11 days ago, I said. The color left his face. Savannah, his attorney called this morning, I said. Louise Tran. I assume you'll be hearing from her soon as well. Harold updated his estate documents last fall. You should probably contact a lawyer of your own before the process moves forward. He stared at me. What does that mean? It means what it means. I picked up my bag, which was already packed because I had had 11 days to prepare for this conversation. I've also been in touch with my own attorney. I have documentation of the withdrawals from the joint account going back 14 months. I have statements. I also have screenshots from Harold's phone, which he gave me permission to look through, of conversations that I think you'll find self-explanatory. He went very still. The house, I said, was purchased largely with my funds and my credit. I have documentation of that as well. My attorney says the path forward is relatively straightforward. You can't just curious. He stopped, started again. Where are you going? To my sister's, I said. I'll be in touch through the attorneys from here. I picked up the box on the table by the door. Harold's record player, the 3 vinyl records, the framed photograph from 1971. Louise Tran had told me that as executor, I was entitled to remove personal effects prior to estate proceedings, and I had chosen these. At the door I stopped. I didn't turn around. He didn't die alone, I said. I want you to know that he had someone with him. He had good food and music, and he found a chocolate egg behind his nightstand on Easter morning, and he smiled like you wouldn't believe. I paused. He deserved better than what you gave him. So did I. I drove to my sister's apartment in Durham. She opened the door and took one look at me and took the box out of my arms without saying a word and put the kettle on. I sat at her kitchen table and I looked at my hands. These hands that have restarted hearts, that have held the hands of strangers dying, that have folded blankets and filled pill organizers and glazed the ham with peach preserves at 7 in the morning. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like they were entirely mine. The estate settled 4 months later. My attorney handled the divorce proceedings concurrently, which was efficient and brutal in equal measure, the way necessary things often are. The joint account discrepancy was documented and addressed. The house was handled according to the contribution records I had retained. I went back to work at the cardiac ICU. I picked up my normal shifts, just my normal shifts, no more overtime to save for a future that no longer existed. I bought a small apartment on the east side of Charlotte with a balcony that faces east, so I can see the sunrise on my days off. I kept Harold's record player on the bookshelf. I kept his 3 records. I play them sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the light is coming in and the coffee is hot and the day hasn't asked anything of me yet. I don't know what justice is supposed to feel like. I'm not sure it feels like anything specific. It's quieter than you'd think. It's more like standing in a warm room after a long time in the cold and just breathing and noticing that you're still here. Harold made sure I was still here. That's what I think about. I think about him finding that chocolate egg. I think about the way he held it in his palm. I think about him grinning in front of that helicopter in 1971, 24 years old, squinting against the sun, like a man who knew something the rest of us were still figuring out. He deserved the world. He got 11 days of peach preserves and vinyl records and someone who stayed. I hope it was enough. I think it was. I've thought a lot about what Harold said that first night, when the soup was barely warm and his hands were still cold, and he looked at me across that bowl and said, "You should leave him, you know." Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just plainly, the way people speak when they stopped having the energy to soften things that don't deserve softening. He was right. But I think he was saying something larger than he let on, what I've come to understand, not from a book. Not from anyone telling me, but from sitting in that back bedroom for 11 days and watching a man face the end of his life with more dignity than most people bring to ordinary Tuesday mornings, is that the choices we make quietly, consistently, when nobody is watching, are the ones that actually define us. Not the big dramatic moments, the small ones. Filling a prescription nobody asked you to fill, turning the heat back on, sitting down at a kitchen table with a jar of peach preserves because someone looks like they need something sweet, and you're too tired to think of anything more eloquent than that. Harold had been watching those small choices for years. That's the part that undoes me when I think about it. He noticed. He kept track, not to repay me. I never did any of it expecting anything in return, but because he understood something I was still learning, which is that how you treat people when it costs you something is the only accurate measure of who you actually are. My husband had made his choices too. 14 months of withdrawals. 3 unreturned voicemails from a doctor trying to keep his grandfather alive. A note on a legal pad. He had chosen over and over again in small increments who he was going to be. By the time I stood in that 51-degree kitchen reading his handwriting, the choosing was already done. I just hadn't been shown the results yet. That's how it works, I think. Not as punishment from somewhere outside you, as consequence from somewhere inside you, as consequence from somewhere inside. The person you are building, decision by decision, eventually becomes the person you're stuck with. And the life that person has built, or hollowed out, is the life you wake up inside. I am not a person who believes in passivity. I never have been. I chose nursing because I wanted to be in the room where things actually happen, where the difference between doing something and doing nothing is measurable and real. What Harold gave me, beyond the practical things, beyond the estate, beyond the financial stability that let me start over without drowning, was the confirmation that the way I had been living my life was not naive. It was not foolish. It was not wasted on people who didn't deserve it. It landed on him. He caught it. He held on to it. I think about that when I'm on shift and a patient is scared and I take an extra 2 minutes. I don't technically have to just sit with them. I think about it when I'm tired and I do the right thing anyway. Not because I expect a letter in a lockbox, but because Harold showed me that those moments go somewhere. They mean something to someone, even when you have no idea you're being witnessed. The record player is on my bookshelf. I play those 3 records on quiet mornings. I think about a 24-year-old man squinting into the sun in 1971, grinning like the future was entirely his. It was, in all the ways that mattered. And for 11 days, so was mine.